everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for your next pb&j card class, and today I will be showing you a watercolor technique featuring Penny Black's slapstick cling stamp Overjoyed. And I just love painting in this bird, and I will begin here by putting the stamp into my misti, a stamp positioning tool that will allow me to continue to stamp the image in the same place. And I'm inking just the bird, mostly the bird, with my Fired Brick Distress ink. And you could use markers or ink. Basically the main thing that you want is your ink to be water soluble so that you're able to get a no line effect. And what you've stamped will blend when you add your watercolors. To watercolor my image, I'm using Distress Ink re-inkers. This give a really bold color. And they also coordinate with for the bird with that Fired Brick stamping that I did here at the beginning. So to begin, I'm just adding water, and you'll see that the ink that stamped the image will start to blend and bleed, and that's exactly what we want it to do. I'm keeping this in the exact same position in the misti, so I'm not using very much paint or very much water as I paint. I don't want it to curl or bubble too much or get the misti underneath really wet. And the colors I'm using here on the side, I just squeezed them onto an acrylic block to create a palette, are Fired Brick Spiced Marmalade and also a little bit of walnut stain. And I'm just going in and painting those in, sometimes blending with water, sometimes blending with another color like the Spiced Marmalade. And first wetting down the area with just water, and it creates that light red because it's blending the ink that stamped the image. Then I can add the darker colors, those vibrant re-inker colors on top. And you really hardly need any of those re-inkers. What I put, those tiny little drops, were actually way more than I needed because that color is so strong. It's a re-inker. But you could use any watercolors that you have. You could color with your markers onto a palette to create that. You could use the shimmers, paints. You could really use whatever you have on hand. As long as what you're stamping with is a water-soluble ink and what you put on top is also watercolor and a wet ink, then you're going to get that no line look. And I'm just going to speed things way up here to show you the process of my painting, but not have this video last too long. And so here I'll just show you the painting of the bird. And just as I finish up here painting in the bird, I wanted to mention I am working on Canson 140-pound watercolor paper, and I stamped this and am painting on the smoothest side of the cardstock, just so that when we stamp in some of these details, they stamp a little bit clearer on the smooth cardstock. So I let that air dry, which didn't take very long because it's not a lot of wetness was added. And now I'm going back to that image because we didn't take it out of the misti or move the stamp, putting a darker color red onto some of the details on that bird and then re-stamping them. And so now we can go back, still keep that no line watercolored effect, but add in, like for example here, the dark eye and some of those the look of a pencil line or a hand-drawn line and details onto the bird. And if you see me stamping it multiple times, just want to make sure that I darken up the color by repeatedly stamping it. And I'm going to zoom in here for you so that you can get a nice look at those details now, the feathers and those lines that we got by re-stamping that once it was dry. So I'm going to use the same technique as I continue with my image. So now I'm moving down to the leaves. For these, I colored onto the image using a marker. Also could use an ink pad, a small ink pad. Just again want to make sure that it's a water soluble type of ink that's going to reconstitute and blend when water or watercolors are added on top. I worked in small sections so that that marker ink didn't have time to dry before I stamped it. Stamped it a couple of times because even though I'm working on the smoother side of this watercolor paper, it does still have some texture to it, and this just ensures that there's enough ink and the image is there for me to see. So here I'm going in and this is just with water. I am blending the ink that is there. I'm so sorry about my head sticking, it's hanging over here and my crazy hair. But what I'm doing is just blending the ink that's there with water, working around those little piles of snow on those leaves. But the good thing is if you cover one up on accident, it's no big deal because it's no line painting and no one will know. So now I'm going to add my shading using another re-inker, and this is that peeled paint re-inker. You could also use any other watercolors that you have, or your markers could be colored onto the acrylic block to create a palette. I'm adding that closest to where the leaf would normally hit the branch or the stem. And as it extends out towards the edges of the leaves, I'm leaving that lighter. So I put down the re-inker color and then go back with water just to blend it a little bit more so that there isn't a harsh line. And I'll do that for the other two leaves as well. So once those are dry, didn't take very long because not very much ink or water is used. I'm using a nice dark color marker in green to go back in and restamp some of those details. Not all of them. When I color, I'm trying not to color on the outline of the leaf, but just those details on the inside. It's very subtle, but I think when the whole thing is complete, it gives it a nice finished look. And I'll have all of the exact stamps and marker colors and inks all listed at the end of the video in a supply list. And there's just a look at some of those details that were added by restamping that after it was dry. So to capture the berries that are really close here on this branch, I'm just inking all of that up, even the branch part, with the Fired Brick Distress ink. And I wasn't too worried about the branch becoming red because I'm going to be putting a dark brown over the top, so it didn't matter. And I just painted them in with the Distress Ink Re-Inker ink. And here I'm just adding a few blending, some touches there on that. I didn't think I needed to show you all of that. I did it the same way that I painted the bird. And then going back with the nice dark burgundy marker to stamp in some of those details. I went ahead and painted in that branch with a dark brown using the walnut stain Distress Ink Re-Inker. Now I've removed the panel from the misti and I'm going to paint the background. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm wetting the area that I'm going to paint just with water. And I'm going to use Broken China ink. This is also from the Re-Inker and I've put that onto my acrylic block. And you do want to be careful not to touch the image that you've just painted, because those colors will bleed and blend, especially the reds. They seem to be kind of pesky about blending. It's really hard not to it's really hard to completely avoid that, and a little bit I think just adds to the watercolor flavor of the design. I put down the broken china closest to the image and then go back with water to blend, and then I just keep working along the wet edge. So keeping things wet as I move around the image, add more color here and there, and blend with water. And by keeping things wet as I work and keeping that edge wet and moving around the image, it helps from creating like a stark line where you've stopped adding the ink or you've started on another portion of the image. And you can always go back if you feel like things are drying on you, just go back and add more water, especially around the outer edge of that blue ink. Now once that was dry, I decided to add some more green, and this is the peeled paint reinker. And I'm adding that towards the top left-hand side and then blending it out with water. And I'm going to add just a little bit more stamping up in this corner, and I wanted it to be sort of extending from a green background. And this painting, I wanted to leave some of that great watercolor texture. So if there's edges to where I stopped painting the green and it blends into the blue, or splatters or what looks like little droplets, I was going for that because I'm going to put some ink on top, but I really like the texture that that provides and keeps the watercolor look going even when I add the inking and stamping on top. And you'll see that here in just a minute. So once that was dry, now I'm going to put that Memento Olive Grove ink on top, just using an ink blending tool with a foam pad. And there you can see where the texture of that watercolor with the green still shows through, but you can have that beautiful inked edge and a little bit deeper, richer color. I'm going to add Vintage Photo Distress ink, again with an ink blending tool and a foam pad, around the outer edges. And I really love the look of Distress inks on top of the watercolor. Now here's that additional stamping I had mentioned. So I'm working with this transparent set from Penny Black. This is from the set Woodland Beauty. And I'm just positioning it there in the Misti, and I'm stamping it with the Olive Grove ink. So that same ink that I applied to the background, now I'm stamping with, so it gives a nice tone-on-tone look. I'm going to stamp it twice just to darken things up, and because I'm stamping on watercolor paper, that helps get all the crispness of the image even when stamping on the textured cardstock. And here I'm just positioning that onto the background, and I'll re-stamp again. For a final touch, I'm going to use the Antique Linen Distress Ink Reinker, and I'm going to add a few splatters to the background. I'm going to cover the bird and the branch area and put a lot of water. So this is really watered down, and when it dries, it's very subtle. But I felt like this side of the card just needed something to finish it off. I simply mounted that panel to my note card and added a sentiment too, and it was finished. So here's a look at that finished card. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter, as well as our blog and website, and I'll have all of those linked below in the YouTube description box below. And here's a list of all the supplies used in creating today's card.